Jesus and silence. The source of all action. In Senegal, I am sitting in a small shop with a young man. We are talking about energy, about strength, about life. In the middle of the conversation, he stands up, calmly rolls out his prayer rug and begins to pray. He is a Muslim. 5 times a day, he consciously interrupts his daily routine, realigns himself and collects his thoughts. It is natural, calm, without explanation. Something similar happens in many monasteries. At least 3 times a day, people pause. Prayer, silence and meditation are not a luxury there, but a way of life. A fixed rhythm of gathering and letting go. Back in Germany, I am sitting in a cafe. A young man tells me about his burnout. High performance. High recognition. Even more performance. Hardly any breaks. At some point, nothing works anymore. Burnout, exhaustion, emptiness, breakdown. This raises a simple but profound question for me. Could regular periods of silence, rest and conscious relaxation prevent something like this? And a second question follows. Is this spiritual path, this practice of retreat, contemplation and inner alignment, still clearly taught by churches or religious communities today? In my experience, people who regularly seek silence rarely experience burnout. Not because they achieve less, on the contrary, they usually achieve more, but because tension and relaxation are in balance. Because they don't just use up their energy, they constantly renew it. We find astonishingly clear foundations for this in the sources about Jesus. Not as a moral requirement, but as a lived way of life. Jesus repeatedly withdrew consciously. He sought silence, prayer, contemplation, closeness to the source. The Gospels report this not just once, but again and again. Early in the morning before daybreak, he went to a lonely place. Sometimes he spent whole nights in prayer. Sometimes he climbed a mountain alone. Sometimes he consciously withdrew after intense encounters. These are not subordinate clauses. They show that Jesus' work regularly springs from silence. He did not act out of activism, not out of ego, not out of mere willpower, but from an inner connection with the source of God, which was nourished in silence. Jesus himself says it clearly. He acts from his inner connection to the Father. His actions were a response to the inner call. From his openness to the divine. This line runs through the canonical Gospels, but often only hinted at. It is as if it had been deliberately removed so that people would listen less to their inner voice and more to the voice of the Church, which was becoming increasingly powerful. This silence, meditation and prayer of Jesus is described more clearly in the apocryphal writings, which have long been hidden and suppressed. In the Gospel of Thomas, for example, we find no miracle stories, no external drama. Instead, there is a radical teaching on consciousness. Jesus says there, in essence, the kingdom is within you and outside you. When you recognize yourselves, you will be recognized. Recognition here does not come through thinking, but through inner vision. Not through instruction, but through awakening. Silence is not emptiness, but a space full of presence. The Gospel of Truth also speaks of this. It says, "Knowledge is tranquility, and whoever finds tranquility rests in the Father." Healing here does not come through technique or method, but through tranquility, contemplation, remembrance, resting within oneself. Through rediscovering the connection to the source. In the Pistis Sophia, this path is described in even more cosmic terms. Jesus withdraws into realms of light, receives wisdom and power there, and returns strengthened to teach and heal. The disciples often do not understand him, because they are still caught up in external thinking. And in the Essene tradition, in the Gospel of the Holy 12, we find a very grounded and nature-loving mysticism. Retreat into the silence of nature, fasting, inner purification. Jesus says there, in essence, "It is not I who heal you, but the Spirit of God working through me." Jesus became transparent to the divine spirit and power, just as we can become. UA. All these texts, canonical, apocryphal, mystical, point in the same direction. Jesus' power comes from silence, from the inner connection with God, from becoming silent in God. In the course of church history, this contemplative dimension was greatly reduced. Not completely erased, but overlaid. By dogmas. By theories of guilt and redemption. By external authority. But the depth remained, like an underground stream. The Desert Fathers lived by it. They said, "Flee, be silent, rest, therein lie the roots of clarity." Centuries later, Meister Eckhart summed it up: God is where the ego is silent. Nothing is more like God than silence. And this is precisely where this ancient lineage touches modern language. Eckhart Tolle says, in essence, Jesus lived from presence. The kingdom of God is not a place, but a state of consciousness. Not the future, but now. Tolle is not inventing anything new. He is translating what Jesus lived, what the apocryphal texts explicitly name and what the Bible implicitly suggests, is made audible here anew. The essence is clear. Silence is not a retreat from the world. It is the source of genuine action. Action does not come from the ego, but from the inner source, when we become permeable. The kingdom of God is not an external institution, but an inner reality. Knowledge does not come through thinking alone, but through tranquility. Healing does not happen primarily through technique, but through a state of consciousness. Perhaps that is the invitation of a Sunday. Do no more. Explain no more. Fight no more. But become still. Time for God, time for me, time for family and friends. Jesus withdrew, not to escape the world, but to encounter it from the depths. This stillness is also accessible to you, not as an achievement, not as a spiritual technique, but as a space that is there when you no longer hold on to anything. Perhaps a moment is enough today. A breath. A pause. Perhaps in the middle of life. For true action begins in stillness and unfolds in life.